one of the scariest things is not building an effective culture. It's one thing to build tech and make it wrong, and you can fix it. Culture you can fix, but it's a hell of a lot harder because people are a lot more complicated. That's one that as you grow exponentially, you need to not neglect. And sometimes you need to take some good amount of time and work on it as your full-time job. Watching some of the people I've worked with, I think what they do very, very well is to play that game by keeping the investors to the side while they try to tell them, we've got it. And if you can do that successfully and get your investors to believe you, then you don't have them as much of a problem. The very interesting issue happens when you're between what you think is right and what the users think is right, and you have to balance that very, very carefully. It's a hard problem. It's one that at Reddit and Pinterest we dealt with all the time because users can be very vocal. They can get very, very upset if you change anything. So what I believe is you're always doing what you think is right for the users, even if they don't necessarily think it is. And oftentimes it may be a little bumpy, but they will eventually believe in what you're doing if you're building the right thing. There's been some famous examples to counter my argument, but if you do the right thing for them, they will thank you for it later. You have to teach them that madness is part of the job. Yeah, I've had a couple cases where I told an engineer, look, if you want nice and stable, you can go to Intel. They're a great company. Everything is very well run. But if you're at a startup, it's going to be bumpy. It has to be bumpy because I don't know what's going to happen next week. I mean, I'm starting to get some ideas, but there's always something interesting and new. So I think it actually goes back to you have to teach the engineers. You have to find the engineers that are okay with that. And some engineers are not okay with that, and they may never be. Yeah, so it's a very interesting question. There's a lot to that, but I'll go into a couple things that I think are hypercritical. Funding is critical. And one thing I've noticed in Silicon Valley is the engineers can get really good, the founders can get really good terms for what they're building. In other places of the world, that's much harder, and it all starts with the money. Now, that's not completely true. These days, you can actually build a company to something very interesting on less money. But if it's still hard to get money, people will move to Silicon Valley where it's easier. And I've seen that a lot. We get a lot of people coming from some places like Copenhagen. I remember I met one founder, and he said, I've got to move to San Francisco. So I think it comes from, that's at least one big part of the pie, is you got to get the money here, because this is a great city. I would love to work out of here. Great universities, that's also another critical thing. We also have great universities. There's great universities here, so it's not a lack of talent. But I think the money has to be there with good terms that entice people to stay here. So it might come from partially from the government subsidizing, but it also might come from trying to push the venture capital to open up better terms here. There's a couple that I'm following specifically. I think AR is huge. I think it's maybe still a good number of years out before it is the magic glasses you put on and the world changes around you. But when that happens, the world is, that to me may be the next revolution in the same way that the iPhone was a big revolution, the smartphone. The other one I'm looking at is AI. We're seeing AI, I almost feel like it's becoming casual, like, oh yeah, throw a little AI on that. And it really is. For a long time, you wouldn't go straight to neural nets. Neural nets they're difficult to debug, and if something breaks, you're in a bad spot. But they've gotten so effective and the computing has gotten so high that we're actually at a stage where it's like, yeah, just throw a little neural net at it. We don't know how it works, but it just seems to work. And so the tides are shifting that way, and they're getting more casual. I found this one YouTube channel, and it's really fun. In 5 minutes, you set up a self-driving remote control car. It's not as obviously as sophisticated as it needs to be, but it can follow a sidewalk, and it's running on a Raspberry Pi, running a neural net. That's really cool. It's becoming so democratized and ubiquitous. So I think that's changing things. And there's a couple other interesting technologies that I think are going to change the world. The digital currencies are really fascinating. And actually the underlying technology underneath them, blockchaining and all that, will change the way that I think we build secure, trusted systems. It's a really cool time. The problem is we need to solve fake news. And in the same way we have gotten really good at spam, account takeovers, hacking, I mean, we've still obviously got a lot of work to do in those areas, but it's a pretty mature area. We've got to solve fake news at the source. We're actually looking at it at a couple of companies that I'm involved in. to first define it, because it's actually really hard to define. Is the onion fake news? I don't think it is, because it's pretty obvious what it is. What I think is really scary stuff is when you have, there's a classic case, goes back to the 60s, you put out 99 correct facts and 1 misleading fact. And I think that's really scary stuff. But I think if we look at the problem and we treat it like spam, we treat it like something where it's being engineered, I think we can start to solve this problem. So I'm on the side of saying, I think we can solve fake news. I think we can go into it and treat it like a really hard engineering problem, break it down, apply some various machine learning as well as very good human rules, and start to understand where it's coming from, how it's constructed. It's just my theory. I haven't done it yet, but I think it can be. I think we can get on top of it. And so I'd actually like to just stop it instead of changing the course of things, because I think getting news from social media is a fantastic thing. It really democratizes news. Instead of having to go through CNN, which I think is a very important thing, or New York Times and these other platforms, you can get news from people on the ground who are actually experiencing the hurricane in their back door. I mean, I'm working on a couple of things, mostly for fun. I mean, I'm working on a book. I'd like to make a book and a podcast around how you build companies from zero to big. So we're kind of starting to develop that. Another one that I'm working on is I'm fascinating with how you get information into the human brain in a smoother way. The scary sci-fi version is you go direct to brain. That I'm not interested in, but how do you approximate it in other ways? So I'm looking at how we use other parts of our body sensors. We could do a lot more with audio, we could do a lot more with touch and these other things. And how do I get some information to your brain without you even noticing that it came in? Not in a scary way. I mean, you want that information. You have put on a device to give you that information. And so that's a fascinating problem. The visual cortex and all that has been really well understood, but they've not done that research that I can find on other sensors of our body. So I'd like to build out that and then see if I can build some products that, for instance, could tell me what time of day it is, and I just know what time of day it is, and then build apps almost for augmenting your brain. Working on that, working on a game, because that's fun. Occasionally I've got to do something a little creative with my hands. And I'm also working on an animatronic parrot. It's working. It's starting to get there. I want it to be, slightly wisecracking. If I go up to somebody, it'll start to tease them and things like that. So that's a fun one. I love 3D printers. I miss hardware a lot. So yeah, lots of silly things. That's a big one. I am particularly worried right now about how AI and automation is going to affect people's day-to-day lives. It's a funny thing. For many years, for the existence of humanity, some technologies become obsolete, and new technology comes in, and the number of jobs keeps increasing. So, maybe a blacksmith, they lose their job because that's no longer the way to do things. But now you have ironsmithing, and you have a whole new revolution. Things like Uber, I think, brought in that you have taxi cabs, but now they've made it even more generalized so that more people can drive them. Self-driving cars are going to destroy, I think, the portions of the industry like truck driving. And that really worries me, because now we may be hitting that part of the curve where you have more jobs being lost than created, and that's troublesome for me. So I'm fascinated with technologies and things that we can do to shift either those people to new jobs or give them some kind of a basic existence that they can be guaranteed on, and then they can maybe work on other things. So fascinated with different ideas on social, for instance, like a basic income, or maybe a basic set of necessities is something that I've been studying. So maybe we supply food to everybody, or maybe we supply food and shelter or something like that. And now, do we change the industry to something where they can go and explore other things, because they don't have to worry every day about getting money for food? Now they can focus on other things, and maybe that's the next industry. They can go work on whatever they want to work on, art or music or science or something, and that might be a long-term way to shift so that everybody has something they can work on.
Marty, thanks a lot for taking your time.
Thank you.